And now we're being joined by Mark Macnamee, Ukraine Business News Network co-founder. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
So let me actually go back to this summit that is taking place in St. Petersburg. Apparently, it is meant to improve Russia's ties with some of these countries and boost Russian business and sort of improve the economy. Well, that's the official stance. But I mean, is it meant to do something else? Why is it taking place?
Sure. Well, the summit is an annual gathering that's been going on for years, so no real surprise here. In the past, naturally, the gathering has been intended to attract foreign investment, broadly speaking, most of that foreign investment being Western investors. So this was always a very large affair attended by the most high-profile Western multinational corporations year after year after year. Now it's taken on a much more political dimension, of course, in light of the war, in light of the fact that a lot of the Western companies have either departed or otherwise, if they're still active in Russia, are not going to be showing a high profile at the event. So this has more of a political angle in terms of Russia's clear attempt to try to attract and ingratiate itself with the global South, right, with the non-Western world much more, and to demonstrate that Russia has stood up to the United States and to NATO and to the Western world and continues to thrive, at least portray that image, and show the rest of the world that there is an alternative path than simply aligning with the Western world, and that you can take the path that Russia has taken and you can still thrive as an economy, maintain some allies internationally, and maybe ultimately develop somewhat of an alternative system in antithesis towards the Western world. Now, whether this is achievable or not is not necessarily the point, but it is to show that Russia is alive and well, and in the face of these extreme sanctions, and as the economy continues to perform at least far better than initially expected after the extraordinary sanctions against Russia.
Mm-hmm. The USSR, the predecessor of nowadays Russia, lost to West because of economic competition and arms race, of course. Now, can history repeat itself, or does the Kremlin has so much backing from China these days that it just won't happen?
Sure. Well, a very broad question. My view is that history would more or less repeat itself. I would make a little disclaimer that the collapse of the Soviet Union, yes, was driven in part by sort of the loss of competition against the Western world, the arms race, extreme economic financial pressure on the Soviet system. And I would say the system at the end of the day just simply was outcompeted. However, the Soviet Union as a political entity collapsed because of very deliberate decisions made by the political leadership at the time, by Gorbachev being more reform-minded. Putin is determined to not make those same political decisions and is, in fact, making very different political decisions at this very time. That said, the Russian system, again, centralized, authoritarian, these types of systems, like the Soviet system, prone to severe political errors, like the political error in invading Ukraine itself, not much economic dynamism, very little domestic strength, vitality, as we're seeing with the extreme imports to support this extraordinary defense spending for the war. So importing from the rest of the world, primarily from China. So Russia really relying even more so on China as in order to drive this war. And so this is not necessarily a recipe for success long term. And I do think this will inevitably lead to the demise of Putin's regime and this type of system because of the inherent political, economic, financial vulnerabilities within it. But of course, this is a process, and we are seeing quite extreme trauma, of course, in the form of this war in Ukraine.
I have another historical parallel here. It also happened before the Second World War, when Hitler reshaped the German economy only to serve its war purposes. And in the long run, it just cannot stay this way. Therefore, can Russia maintain what it's doing now in strictly economical sense for long years?
No, absolutely not. I do not believe so. Right? If we're talking about the timeline being years, Russia is already dealing with an economic crisis. It's just that it is slow bleeding, and they can manage it contingent upon the very high oil prices that we've seen, which are artificially inflated thanks to the OPEC deal, and Russia's ability to actually sort of skirt around the sanctions with this shadow fleet, with sort of shady insurance schemes to maintain the export values of this oil. You take away that, and then this economic crisis becomes front and center and right in front of Russia's face very quickly. And there's vulnerabilities there. We could see that happening. We could see tightening of sanctions. We could see the OPEC deal falling apart. We've seen some, obviously, the vulnerabilities of that deal this past week. We could see oil prices then going lower. Not next week, probably not next month, but let's say 6 months from now, a year from now, a year and a half. And then you add in all the domestic factors. I mean, if you just look at the labor market, what's happened in the war with conscripting so many men into the military. Russia, it looks like, lost about 40,000 men in May alone, right? Extraordinary losses on the ground, casualties of those numbers. That in just May alone, Russia fatalities lost as many men as they lost in 10 years in Afghanistan. And that's just in May. This is going to continue, this extreme intensity of the fighting. And that means, just aside from the humanitarian issues, just economically, financially speaking, losing that many men from your labor market, plus the outflow of capital, the weakness of the ruble's being propped up because of the quite extreme capital controls, which recently were just extended another year. Inflation is extremely high because nominal wage growth is at 20% or higher. Because of the lack of labor in the country. And all of these things are going to continue to worsen. There's no other path. Interest rates are going to likely go up again further this week. Interest rates are at 16%, could go to 17, could go to 18%, stay in double digits for all of next year. As mentioned, the ruble has been protected. The ruble should be well beyond 100 to the dollar, 110, 120, who knows? It's being protected at around 90 to the dollar. Inflation is around 7-8% the last few months. There's not much reason to see inflation going down when you have such extreme labor costs that companies have to cover. And again, the labor situation can't improve amid this extreme loss of manpower in the war, which is going to continue to worsen. The imports for the system, they are reliant on external manufacturing. They don't manufacture enough domestically for the defense sector. They have to continue to import. That, of course, continues to put further pressure on the ruble. Again, all of these things worsening. The key here, what to watch out for, is oil prices. This is what has been saving the Russian economy. You start to see oil prices going below, say, 75. And oil prices after this OPEC meeting have gone down into the high 70s. If they sustain themselves at that level, 75, 70, Russia, because of the sanctions, selling below that level by $10 to $15 before the below those Brent crude rates, global rates, then you start to see a lot more pressure on the economic and financial system of Russia.
Right. So you just said that sanctions that were put on imports of Russian oil seem to be working. But what about some other sanctions? I mean, where's the weak link? Because, the Western world keeps on imposing these sanctions. Now, recently, tariffs on the agricultural products, this and that. And it doesn't really translate into a visible change on the ground, right?
Right, and that's true. I mean, there is change within the economy, most definitely. We've seen a transformation of the Russian economy and put it onto a war footing, and then all these vulnerabilities that I've discussed, which are sort of masked and hidden because of Russia's ability to continue to export oil, and fortunately for Moscow's position, having oil prices artificially buttressed by the OPEC deal. To say sanctions are working, it's a difficult question, because what do we mean by working? I think in most people's sort of perception of if sanctions are working or not, it means, is this stopping Russia from being able to fund and continue the war? Obviously, it's been over 2 years now, and that has not been the case, and Russia will be able to continue to fund the war, I would say confidently, through the end of this year, likely through the end of next year, assuming no major black swan event or change in oil prices or extreme impact of sanctions. But the point is, the sanctions have always been bent to erode the economy long term and try to dissuade and change the calculation within the Kremlin and within the political elites of Russia to alter their calculus. It does take a long time, but the sanctions were never really going to be the silver bullet in the end. And it's been over 2 years, and they have proven not to be the silver bullet, of course.
Mm-hmm. So it takes time.
Mark Macnamee.
But the victory is inevitable for Ukraine.
Agreed.
Thank you for being with us this evening and for your insights.